Hey everyone, this is your host, Andrew Holland. Thank you so much for listening to the Andrew Holland podcast each and every week, where we talk about business, entrepreneurship, and everything in between. As an entrepreneur who's been through a lot of highs and a lot of lows, I started this podcast to be a source of weekly motivation, inspiration, and support for all of us who are working to achieve something meaningful. And as importantly, so that none of us ever have to feel alone or isolated while we're doing so. Together, we explore the stories of successful people, we get insight and advice from individuals who have accomplished amazing things. We discuss practical and fascinating business models and strategies, and we dive deep into understanding ourselves as human beings. So please, help me grow our group and subscribe to the show on your favorite audio platform. Subscribe to, watch, and thumbs up our episodes on our YouTube channel, the Andrew Holland Podcast. Follow and interact with me on Twitter and Threads. My handle is A Holland Podcast. That's A Holland Podcast. That's probably my favorite part of the whole podcast is the interaction I get with our guests and with you as our listeners. Lastly, if you enjoy the show and you want to support what we're working to accomplish, please share our show with your friends, with your family, and your colleagues at work. This show is nothing without you and your support, and I'm so incredibly thankful for each and every one of you listening, watching, and sharing the podcast every single week. Now it's time to get our motivation, inspiration, and support for this week and jump into today's episode. In today's episode, I sit down with Steve Schnall, the Chief Development Officer for Phoenix Children's Hospital, one of the largest pediatric hospitals in the United States. Steve has been with the organization since 1983, at the very roots of when Phoenix Children's Hospital started. He worked on the business administrative side of things up until 2001, when he shifted over to Phoenix Children's Foundation, where he was the primary, and continues to be, I should say, the primary fundraiser for the Phoenix Children's Foundation. Steve and I have an incredible conversation that covers so many topics, including leadership, culture, some of the mistakes that he made and what we can all learn from on how you establish a meaningful culture where people want to stick around and they're really attached to the mission and purpose of the organization. We talk about his interactions with some of the most philanthropic donors that they have, many millionaires and billionaires, and how he views them and what it's like to ask people for their hard-earned money when giving to the Phoenix Children's Foundation. This was one of the most in-depth conversations I've had about culture and leadership, and I think you will take away a lot from this conversation. I know I did, and it was a lot of fun. I think you'll feel the same way.
While Andrew Holland is a CPA, a real estate broker, and involved in multiple businesses, including some investment companies, the Andrew Holland podcast is for informational purposes only. All of Andrew's views and those of his guests are solely their opinions and do not reflect the opinions of any of the businesses or companies Andrew or his guests are affiliated with. You should not treat any advice, conversation, business recommendation, investment recommendation, or anything of the like as a specific inducement to make a specific business decision, take a specific action, make a particular investment, or follow a specific business or investment strategy. Thank you so much for listening and enjoy the show.
Steve, thank you so much for joining the Andrew Holland Podcast and welcome.
Well, thank you. I'm glad to be here.
So you are the Chief Development Officer for Phoenix Children's Hospital.
Yes,
And you've been there since the very beginning in 1983.
I have.
And you have seen it grow from an idea to now one of the largest pediatric hospitals in the country. There's so many ups and downs that the Phoenix Children's Hospital went through. And so I want to talk about that because I think you have really unique insight into how to persevere through some of those things. And as the Chief Development Officer, you report directly to the CEO, Robert, correct?
Yes.
Okay. So, and you've seen it through all the ups and downs. But before we get there, people always want to know, how did you get to where you are? How did you get involved in the beginning? So give us some background. Where were you born and raised? How did you get interested in philanthropy? You made a really big goal with the Phoenix Children's Hospital 2 years ago and said, before I retire, I'll help you raise $500 million in the next 7 years. That's an incredibly ambitious goal. So I want to talk about that and how you're doing 2 years into it. But take us back. Give us an idea of your childhood and how you got to where you are.
Yeah, I grew up on the East Coast, born in New York City, raised early years in Westchester, New York, and moved to New Jersey when I was 5 and lived there until I was went off to college. Went to college, started college in Saratoga Springs at a school called Skidmore. And right before I left college, though, my parents moved to Scottsdale, Arizona.
Okay.
And
what year is this, plus or minus?
76.
Okay.
Yeah. And so they moved to Scottsdale, and I'm like, where, what? Imagining tumbleweed, blowing down the dirt road in the desert. And I'm like, this is nuts.
Yeah.
But, enjoy. So I was in New York for 2 years and coming back and forth on holidays and summers here.
You're going to college there?
Yeah.
Okay.
And 2 years into it, my parents said, enough of this, man. You need to move to Arizona and go to ASU. And
were they paying for your college?
Yes.
So they kind of they could tell you what to do.
They could.
Yeah.
And they did. So I went to ASU and took another 3 years at ASU and graduated in 82.
Sounds like you had fun while you were there.
I did. Yeah. As reluctant as I was to make the move, it turned out to be such a blessing to be here and get my start, at ASU, but then my whole career, my life, my family, all here.
Yeah.
But while at ASU, my career ambition at the time was to be a psychologist. And
is that what you went to college for?
Yeah.
Psychology?
Yeah.
Okay.
And imagined that I'd be sitting in a room every day,
analyzing patients' minds.
Yes, and but really helping people.
Yeah.
I mean, I have just kind of that innate drive to help others, and pretty rational thinker and problem solver, and pretty type A in terms of the way I like to, drive and drive change and hopefully drive, bettering people's lives. So after I graduated, there was some psychiatric hospitals in town called Camelback hospitals. And I got my first job there out of school. And while working there, after a few months, I was working on an inpatient psychiatric unit for teenagers with emotional and behavioral kinds of problems.
And this is what year now?
82.
Okay.
82. And while I was there, I met a couple of child psychiatrists, a guy named Jim Joy and two guys, Jim Joy and Dan Field. And I just got to know them. And they said, after 6 months of me being there, they're like, hey, we're starting an inpatient psychiatric unit for what will be the new children's hospital. And we would love for you to make the move and come over there with us and help start that program.
So you obviously made an impression on them with your drive, with your ambition, your desire to help people.
Yeah.
Even within a matter of 6 months.
Yeah.
And so they said, hey, we want to bring you over. What position did they want? How did they want to fit you into the new organization? Which at the time, Phoenix Children's Hospital was a pretty ambitious goal in the sense that, and they were really smart about it. Instead of building their whole own campus, they started the first building on a campus of a hospital that existed already, correct?
Yes. So there was a process called the Certificate of Need process back then, and you really had to demonstrate, the need.
Mm-hmm.
And for a startup organization, that's not an easy thing to do. So the idea was to become a hospital within a hospital. And back at the time, there were two hospitals, Good Samaritan Medical Center, which is now Banner University Medical Center over at 12th Street, and McDowell.
And that was a general hospital for everybody, not focused on pediatrics.
General hospital.
Okay.
And then St. Joe's Hospital, which is down at 3rd and Thomas, which is now Dignity Health. And the two vied for the Children's Hospital. Both of them had pediatric units within those hospitals. but they vied for it. And ultimately, the decision was made. There was a blue ribbon committee of physicians and community leaders that ultimately made the decision to partner with what was then the Good Samaritan Hospital. And so we leased the fourth and eighth floor of that tower that looks like something from the Flintstones. I think they called it the Bedrock Building or something like that. And so we started out 71 beds, fourth floor and eighth floor. And then on an adjacent building on that campus, it was called the Rehab Building, was where the psychiatric unit would go. And so in March of 1983, I began at what was a Good Samaritan inpatient psychiatric unit for kids startup.
Mm-hmm.
And then after Phoenix Children's Hospital was incorporated in September of 1983, we ultimately all became Phoenix Children's Hospital. It was always the plan we would be, but the startup was 6 months before Phoenix Children's Hospital actually opened.
And you weren't right from the get-go on the philanthropic fundraising side, correct?
No, not at all. So in 1983, when we opened, my position was youth counselor. I was making $7.12 an hour. Feeling pretty good about myself at college.
In 1983, that's pretty good.
Must be like $16 an hour now or something.
With inflation, maybe 50.
Yeah. But so anyway, I was a youth counselor, and within 6 months of opening, they needed a coordinator or supervisor, right? And because the program opened, we were full and busy with little kids 12 and under with emotional and behavioral problems. And so they tapped me then and said, hey, we need you to be like the manager, coordinator, or whatever. And that was really the end of my clinical career and the beginning of my administrative career.
And what made you had gone to college for psychology, and that's what you wanted to do. But as you said, you had this innate desire to help people.
Yeah.
Did you basically make that switch because you felt compelled or forced to? Or did you make it because that seemed to align where you believed you were going to most be able to help the organization grow and actually carry out the mission for which they were trying to accomplish? Really to become one of the best pediatric hospitals, not only in the country, but in the world.
Yeah. I wish it was that benevolent, but it really wasn't. I had, like I said, this incredible drive to make things happen. And so when this opportunity became available, I recognized that this was a way to have maybe a larger impact going forward. And ultimately, I imagined, well, maybe I could run this whole psychiatric program with no idea that there was like a whole other path in front of me.
So when you moved to the administrative side, it was made pretty clear, Steve, you're in charge of raising money for the Phoenix Children's Foundation.
No, I didn't actually move over to the foundation until 2001.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I spent from 1983 to 2001, 18 years on the hospital side.
Okay.
And growing the administrative side of the business.
Okay.
And the business side of the business.
Yeah. And just for the benefit of all of us and for our listeners, so there's Phoenix Children's Hospital.
Yes.
Just like any hospital or that organization. Then there's the foundation. Right. And you utilize the foundation to raise funds to support the efforts of the hospital. Now, they also have Phoenix Children's Care Network as well.
Yeah, that's a physician care network.
Okay.
Yeah.
But associated with Phoenix Children's Hospital. And so when you moved over you helped grow the business.
Yeah.
And then in 2001, in looking at Phoenix Children's Hospital, they had some really rough years in the later 90s and the early 2000s. Talk to us about that. And then you brought in the current CEO, Robert, who's just done amazing things and the growth, and he really brought them back to financial stability and has taken them to not only the next level, but the next 10 levels. You were there during all of that.
Yes.
First, what prompted your desire to move from building the administrative side to the foundation in 2001?
Yeah. So I didn't want to do it. I really didn't. I was at the time vice president of marketing, public relations, strategic planning. And so a lot of external functions. And I was really enjoying that and loving that because it gave me a platform to evangelize the mission of Phoenix Children's Hospital.
Yeah.
And be creative and really, figure out strategically, like, how do we get the message out about the incredible work that's happening at the Children's Hospital? And so back at that time in the late 90s, there was a lot of interest in, and it was all financially driven by insurance companies to keep people out of the hospital, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
And because the hospital was the most expensive stop along the healthcare continuum, it still is.
It still is.
Right. So the goal was what kind of wellness programs could be put in place, what kind of prevention programs could be put in place within the communities that we all live in that would essentially prevent the utilization of the most expensive resource, right? So I had this real strong desire to build something for kids. And I felt as the Children's Hospital, we should be not only the place where the sickest and most critically injured kids can come and get the very best care, but a place that really advocated for child health and wellness. And so really took that on. And I'd gone to my CEO at the time and said, hey, I really want to do this. And I think it would be great, in terms of marketing, public relations, but I think it's really great in terms of building our brand as a place that really cares about children beyond kind of when they're sick and injured. He's like, great, you can do it, but we have no money for it. So you got to figure it out. So we did a needs assessment in the community and found out that the leading cause of death and related serious injury was accidental kinds of injuries, right? And so
for
drowning,
children,
so drowning, pedestrian accidents, bicycle injuries, car injury, kids not in car seats, and motor vehicle accidents, etc. So anyway, we put together this whole plan about building an injury prevention center at Phoenix Children's Hospital where we could get out and educate the community, we could provide resources to the community. And so I went to the guy who was leading the foundation at the time, the fundraising guy for Phoenix Children's, and said, hey, we got this really great idea. And he said, oh yeah, we love it. We'll help raise money. And back then the foundation was very small and was very event focused.
Sure.
And so every time we'd, get a little traction, there was another event going on and he'd kind of pull all the resources towards that. And I just started getting frustrated. And I'm like, well, I'm going to figure this out on my own. So I started knocking on doors in town.
I like that. Go get them attitude.
Yeah. And so
So this is early 2000s, real early 2000s or late 1990s?
This is late 90s.
Okay.
Late 90s. And anyway, went to what was then called the St. Luke's Foundation. So there was a hospital called St. Luke's, and they were bought by a for-profit, and then kind of their assets were put into a foundation. And now it's called Vitalant Foundation. But anyway, I went to them, and they had just kind of opened their doors as well. And they loved the idea, and they gave us a $500,000 gift to get this injury prevention program started.
Wow.
And anyway, the foundation loved it because I was out there raising money and I wasn't one of their employees. I was working on the hospital's behalf. So that was really kind of how I started getting into the fundraising world. So now, fast forward to 2001, that was late 90s. We're still a hospital inside of a hospital down at 12th and McDowell, but we are building and moving to where we currently are, 20th Street and Thomas.
You guys bought a 22-acre campus at the time.
We did. 18 acres.
18 acres. Okay.
Yeah.
So, and in 2000, I think you guys broke ground on that for building your own campus.
Well, so we acquired the property in, I think, 99.
Okay.
And then spent a couple of years just retrofitting. It was a facility. It was called the Doctor's Hospital back in the early 60s. And the building, it's the one that's kind of to the east of the main tower. And it's a 5-story hospital building, but built in the 60s. Anyway, our plan was purchase the land that the hospital sat on for $29.5 million. And then we spent another $100 million retrofitting that building to become the Children's Hospital, which we moved in 2002. But in 2001, the gentleman who was heading up the foundation and the CEO at the time, a great guy named Pearl Stamp, said they had a disagreement about like how fundraising should go. Now that we're no longer going to be this hospital inside of a hospital, that we're going to have our own campus, we're going to have visibility within the community, because we really didn't have a lot of visibility within the Samaritan Hospital. So they had a little disagreement. You know how those things tend to go.
That's life. That's
CEOs
business.
tend to kind of get their way.
Yep.
So the gentleman who was in my spot ended up leaving and moved to Fresno and at the Children's Hospital there. And then the CEO, this is June of 2001, came to me and said, "You're moving over to head up the foundation." And I said, "No F-word way." No, I said, "Not happening." I said, "I don't know anything about fundraising," and which I didn't. And I said, "There's one job in all of Arizona to lead the fundraising for the Children's Hospital, and this is an incredible opportunity for somebody." And
that's what he said to you?
No, that's what I said to him.
Oh, okay.
Because I was convincing him, no, I'm not the right guy for this, right? And I said, do a national search and find the best guy for this, who's got experience doing this. He goes, "Nope, I've already talked to the board. We've made the decision. You're our guy." And so that was now June, July 2001. And that's when I started in the foundation. And we were raising about $9 million a year, and we had a team of 15 people.
When you knew you had no choice. And
yes.
I mean, you always have choices, but you're like, if I want to continue with the mission and continue with Phoenix Children's Hospital doing what was your mindset like? I mean, did you begrudgingly move into the position? Did you say, okay, outside of my control, going to put on a new perspective, and I'm just going to do everything I can to help the foundation? Give us some insight into because that's a big, big change.
Yeah.
Going from administrative and everything you'd been doing for the previous almost 20 years, 18 years, to fundraising is hard.
Yeah.
And it's a whole different ball of wax. I've had an investment fund where that lives and breathes by fundraising. Now that's more for profit. Obviously, it's a different beast, but fundraising is a challenge.
Yeah.
Give us some insight into what you were thinking then.
You know, I mean, I think honestly, I mean, I just was like, what the heck am I going to do? Like, I literally have no idea what I'm doing. Right.
But you had just gotten a $500,000 grant essentially from St. Luke's Foundation.
Yeah.
So did you not have confidence in your ability when you had just had a pretty big win for the foundation?
No, I did not have confidence in my ability. I knew I didn't know what the heck was going to happen. Plus, I knew, like, going into the foundation, there was 15 people and they all hated me. I mean, they hated me because, like, here's this guy who's now the leader, right? And who has no idea what he's doing, right? And they're like, we're experienced and we know. So it was rough.
Yeah. You bring up a really good point that happens to a lot of people when they are successful at what they do. And you can take any corporation or any nonprofit, doesn't matter where you go. And someone who maybe isn't familiar with the team has to now lead a team of people that have a high degree of animosity towards you.
Yes.
That gets down to culture. And you and I talked a little bit about culture when we were talking about you coming onto the podcast. How did you respond to that team who looked to you? And I get it. None of us, if you are looked over, let's say, human nature isn't to be like, oh boy, let's welcome the new guy, even though he has no idea and I know how to do his job better than he does. But here I have to listen to his directives. How did you establish the culture of what you have today, which is really a place that people want to be a part of?
Yeah.
They see the mission and feel very welcomed and actually believe that what they're doing at the foundation is making a difference. And we'll talk more about why that's important. But how did you respond in those early days?
Poorly. Very poorly.
Well, I appreciate the honesty.
I wish I had a great answer.
No,
but that's the truth.
So what are you obviously probably butted heads.
Yeah.
How did you get through that? Because that is not uncommon. And the whole point of this podcast is we've all been in situations where we're terrified, which obviously you were. You have people that are gunning for you, whether in the corporate world, even in small business. There's always personalities. We're all humans, and there's all this humans are hard and we're complex. And as you talk psychology, like there's vying for wanting to improve not only the organization, but people's careers. Give us some of the challenges you went through during that time period.
Yeah, it was always like I was the dumbest guy in the room, right? And so, trying to lead a team and build strategy and keep everything focused, and so it's moving in the right direction. When the people that you're surrounded by are just filled with animosity, was just enormously challenging. And, there were days I would just go like, what the heck happened here? Like, how did I end up in this situation?
Did they make their animosity well known?
Very clear. There was no guessing.
And what did you do?
I mean, I just persevered and muscled through. And I remember, my call to serve the mission, and, really just tried to stay focused on, I'm going to be successful at this. I just have this incredible determination to win for something I believe so strongly in. And I just believe so much in the mission of Phoenix Children's Hospital, and have from the very beginning, that this was just another big mountain to climb. But I wasn't going to be deterred by 14 people who were just going to give me the toughest time they could.
So they went out of their way to deliberately make it hard for you.
In fairness to them, you know what? They were angry and they were frustrated, and they were probably afraid for themselves, right? I mean, fear is just such a powerful emotion. I had fear of failure, fear of, looking like I don't know what I'm doing, fear of failing as a leader. And they probably picked up on all that energy that I was putting out there. And like, our lives, our livelihoods are in the hands of this guy who doesn't know what he's doing, technically, skill-wise, etc. And now he's the one who's making the decisions here. I mean, I don't begrudge them for feeling that. I get it.
So you said you responded poorly.
Yes.
And I think that's, I appreciate you sharing that, because I think for all of us, we can look at situations in our lives where if we had the opportunity, we would respond in a different way. But the only way we do that is by learning from our own experiences and listening to other people's experiences and what they would have done differently. So for our benefit, what did you do that makes you say you responded poorly? And how would you do things differently? What did you learn from those things that we can garner? Because I've got a failure list that's 5 books long. But as I age and hopefully mature and get wiser, dare I say that, I'm learning how important, it's part of the reason I started this podcast. Everybody has a different set of life experiences, and pretty much everybody's made every mistake that's possible under the sun. And so for all of us trying to accomplish a serious goal in life, whether it's a philanthropic goal or whether you're trying to start a business, I mean, there's everybody a purpose-driven life goal, so to speak. It's a lot easier to learn from other people's mistakes than having to make all of them yourself. And finally, at the age of 36, going on 37, I'm starting to realize, Andrew, you don't have to be that stupid and naive and arrogant to think you need to make those mistakes. Listen to other people who have already done it, and it's a lot easier. So that's why I asked you that question. What did you learn the most from how you responded? How did you respond that you say it was, you look back and say, boy, if I just would have done this differently? And what advice would you give to us for people that are presented with a situation like that, which is not that uncommon? That happens frequently.
Yeah. I mean, it's a great question. I think, just rolling back, I think I wanted so much to be seen as the leader, right? And I put so much value on that, and everything goes, kind of in my mind 22 years ago, right, about what a leader looked like, right? So they're strong, they're competent, they don't appear weak. They know all the answers. They have to know all the answers.
So you had this caricature of what a
Yeah.
leader should be, and you were trying to fit that mold.
Exactly. And it makes you a pretty poor listener, and it makes you a pretty poor relator, because you're not seeking to understand, you're seeking to be right.
Yeah.
And
That's
so,
a great point.
and so I just so desperately wanted to be right, that I did not take the time to really, understand culture like I understand it today, which is by no means being an expert, but there's a maturation process that happens in life, but also as leaders. And, I think I still have many of those same traits that I had back in 2001 in terms of wanting to be right, wanting to control, and wanting to be seen as the guy with all the answers.
You're a type A and so am I, and that's our curse. Type
Yeah.
A, we tend to have that overconfidence, often perceived as arrogance, and sometimes it is talk more than we should when we should listen. So that's something we type A people have to battle against.
Yeah. And so, just, 21 years later, the edges are softened, and a lot of bruised knees along the way, and a lot of mistakes have been made along the way in terms of understanding the difference between managing people and leading people, right? And I still struggled with wanting to manage people way more than I understood what it meant to lead people.
Typically, once through that 21-year maturation process, oftentimes there's like when rubber hits the road, like something happens that really gets an individual to wake up and say, this is in personal life, professional life, I need to make a change. Like, I'm not accomplishing what I'm trying to do. And you start to learn from there. Did that happen for you?
Yeah. The best barometer for me is how I feel when I pull into the parking lot. Right. And, you pull into the parking space, you turn off the engine, and you sit there, and you either jump out of your car because you can't wait to get in there, you're so excited, or you sit in your car and go, I don't want to go in today.
That's a great barometer.
All right. And, I've had a number of those seasons, let's just say, where I've, just felt like, this doesn't feel good to me. And if it doesn't feel good to me, like, what could it feel like to everybody else?
Yeah.
Right. And there's something going on in this culture that is creating a level of toxicity that is wanting me to get back in the car and drive right out of the parking lot rather than walking in and say, hey, team, let's go.
Well, and, I've talked about, you and I were talking before the podcast, the book of Extreme Ownership is really when there's something like that, culture comes from the top. I say this all the time.
Yeah.
Culture eats strategy for breakfast every day of the week and twice on Sundays.
Yes.
And you can have a whole organization where the people who are closer to the ground are trying to foster a good culture. But if it is not correct at the top, that toxicity will prevail.
Yeah.
And so I love that you talk about that, because I'm a big believer that the majority of organizations that have poor performance, think it's because of financial reasons or operational reasons. And in my experience, and I had to learn this the hard way too, especially as a young kid, similar to what you experienced, my business partner and I have been involved in a lot of businesses, but the first one that we really started, I was 22 or 23, arrogant, overconfident, didn't listen to people, didn't appreciate the value of other people's wisdom and experience. And here you were building an organization. It was a garbage company, which is an odd organization to be starting, but I knew nothing about it. So I was just, I'm a CPA by trade, came from white collar, and trying to pretend like I know what I'm doing in blue collar, and you have all these employees looking up to you. And that's a very daunting position for anybody, especially when I don't even know anything about life at that age.
Right.
And I learned the hard way. And for me, economics is really what drove, facing bankruptcy, really, and realizing, If you go bankrupt, that's fine, but you are responsible if that happens, not any of the other people that are helping you. So you need to do something differently. You've learned that important piece of culture over time. And so I guess back to my original point, most businesses, I believe, that are failing, it has nothing to do with finances or operations. Those are simply symptoms of the real cause, which is culture. The culture is not there. You talk about how you've matured over 21 years. What have you learned about culture and how to instill a culture that allows the organization to ultimately fulfill its mission, regardless of whether it's for profit, not for profit, whatever the mission is?
Yeah, again, a great question. I mean, I think it really comes down to recognizing how little I know, right? And if you really accept that part of yourself, then it really drives you to be a better listener, right? And just because I know what I want and I know what I need to feel motivated, happy, successful, whatever kind of the adjective is, right? I have no idea what you need. And, our organization, I mean, Phoenix Children's Hospital, I think like 7,000 or 8,000 employees right now, and growing. The foundation, when I started with 15 employees, we're up to 100 now. We'll be at 120 in the next couple of years. And you talk about the complexity of going from 15 to 100 people. And we went from 45 to 80 in a 5-year period.
You almost doubled.
Yep. And talk about a long list of mistakes that I made as a leader. And that's where I think the culture paradigm began to make sense to me.
Yeah. What time frame was that where over that 5-year where you were at 45 and you went to 85?
So in 2016, we put together a plan to grow from 45 to 80 people because I'd committed to raise in a 5-year period. The previous 2012 to 2017, we'd raised $196 million for the hospital. And I said that we can grow 25%. So we'd raise $250 million from 2017 to 2022, the next 5 years. But to do that, we need more people. So we got the green light to go ahead and do that. And tried to hire 25 people in 1 year to a 45-person.
I don't even know where you can find 25 competent, capable people to hire, let alone within 1 year.
Yeah. And so, you could just imagine what a disaster that was.
You probably had a lot of those mornings where you just didn't want to get out of your car. You just wanted to turn around and go the other way.
Yeah, it was a complete disaster. And the way we approached it, the way I, led the team to approaching it was just all wrong. And
in what way? So what did you learn from that? What did you do wrong? What specific things did you do wrong that we can learn from that would help someone who's maybe faced with that situation and has no idea where to start? Because that's the real benefit of the experience you have now, is you've internalized how people can do something like that successfully.
Yeah. I mean, probably like much of my life, both personally and professionally, push hard, too much, too soon, too quick, go, 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 go. Like some clock is ticking in my head, but like, why?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And, the hurry up was just the death, of kind of the implementation part of the strategy. Right. And if we had been a lot more methodical about it and recognized that this was not a sprint, this was a marathon, and that we really just needed to keep a nice steady pace about doubling our team, and integrating kind of the team, the new members into the team, into a culture that was really not very healthy and not very stable at that point. Because the year in 2016, when we were planning this, There was also a huge reorganization that happened within the foundation. There was a lot of fear and anxiety about what was going to happen because everybody asked the same question. What does this mean for me?
Yeah.
Right. It's the human,
Which is human
condition.
Yeah.
Right. And it's totally like we do it.
Yeah.
And it's fine and it's appropriate. But there was so much kind of secrecy about this reorganization that was coming.
So people were worried.
Yeah,
fear
so
again.
people, so fear showed up in the workplace, and then fear drives insecurity. Insecurity drives very, very dysfunctional, toxic behavior. So we had like so much of this going on, and then we're doubling in size, and the reorganization, no matter how many times we said, no jobs are getting eliminated. We're growing in this reorganization, but who you report to and what the structure is going to look like is going to be very different, right? It didn't matter how many times that got said until the new org chart was presented.
Until people knew what different meant.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It was just too out there.
Yeah.
And so then, kind of back to, there was a year of so much turmoil, like with this reorganization being planned and this rapid growth that we were talking about, and then the expectations in terms of the amount of money that we need to raise create a lot of fear and anxiety of people aren't going to be successful. How are we going to do this? What's the vision? What's the plan? Where are we going with all this, right?
Because you had just raised $196 million.
In previous 5 years, and we were going to 250.
250. Okay.
Yeah. And so people are like, how are we going to do this, right? Anyway, and then you have all this underlying emotion and energy, right? And then you layer all these new people coming in there, and like, you're just building more stories onto such a weak foundation that everything is going to crack, right? And it did, that year, in 2017, the first year of this 5-year, $250 million fundraising plan.
How did that crack manifest itself?
We had so much turnover. We had really poor employee morale. I'd sit in the parking lot many days going, I don't want to go in. I'm like, oh, this is a toxic cesspool. Yeah. Just so rough. And it was rough.
And you were the leader of this.
And I was the leader. So yeah, I just kind of led people to, the fire without a hose.
Yeah.
Just like, again, clueless about like, how do I dig myself out of this mess? Right?
So many things to talk about, because for anybody that's tried to, culture in and of itself is just incredibly challenging because of everything we talked about. Everybody has different needs and motivations, and then you get larger and you bring more people into an organization. Culture at 5 people is so different than culture at 25 people, and is immensely different at 45 people, and then 85 to 90 people. It just gets progressively harder as you get larger within an organization, especially if you try to grow so quickly to maintain that culture, and you experience that. And that's just the nature of it. But in terms of what you said, I love how you talked about where you believe some of the mistakes happened is pushing too hard, too quickly. And I believe, especially for type A people, but I think we as humans, especially in this day and age, there's of technology and everything moving so quickly. And I know I'm learning this slowly. I just said this to someone the other day. We were talking about an organizational goal, and they're like, oh boy, I hope it happens quickly. And I said, you know what? I don't want it to happen quickly.
Right.
And that was the first time I realized it was a light bulb for me, because that is not the Andrew of even 6 or 12 months ago.
Cool.
What I've realized is anything that comes quickly can be destroyed pretty quickly. And anything that's worth doing will take a sustained amount of incredible effort over a sustained period of time. But in that process, no matter what you're doing, as you so aptly described, you are solidifying a foundation that can take 100 stories. And I'm still trying to learn that. And I always tell my nieces and nephews, patience brings good things to those who are willing to wait for it. But on the same token, so many times I see in my life or in organizations, and we say things, but we don't abide by them. So what you just described, thank you for sharing, because it's a perfect example of why it's so important, especially when you're talking about culture and growing, to be methodical and think through things. Even though it's fun to move fast and to accomplish goals, you're going to be 10 times more successful if you plan. And I don't remember who said this quote, but they said success is 98% planning, 2% execution. And that's hard for us as type A people who are driven and motivated and want to accomplish things. Especially in this, again, I'll say technology has, I'm just getting past like, oh, someone else is going to get there or they're going to do this. And it's like, just relax, just relax. But that's hard. So you've learned that.
No, I
guess
just relax. No,
but let me re-say that. Yeah, as I am, and I think anybody who is building a successful organization foundation like you are, continues to go through that process of learning, often through the school of hard knocks, right? Like you said earlier, bruised knees. How have you, and I know you've instilled the culture now, because of the people that are working there and how long they want to work there, which is a whole nother topic of commitment to an organization. What have you done now culturally to retain the talent that you have? Because organizations, especially with younger generations, are struggling with this because there's not that sense of loyalty. Now you can argue, a lot of people say that, is that the organization's fault, or is that the people working for the organization? I think it's a two-way street.
Sure.
I think people have to feel like the organization genuinely cares about them, and the organization needs to see people genuinely care about the organization and want to help fulfill the mission. You've done a really good job of establishing that culture. How have you done it?
Well, I mean, let me just, 2017, we kicked this thing off, right? This 5-year plan to raise $250 million by the end of 2021. And, 2017, total disaster, trying to hire 25 people. 2018, start to pick up the pieces, right? And get back on kind of a level playing ground, because we were just so upside down in terms of culture.
Would it be fair to say that 2017 was the year you as a leader realized, I got to do something differently?
Probably not until 2018. I'm like, what the heck was that?
Yeah, 2007.
Yeah, because we're living through it, pushing through it, like 2017. Yeah. Go, hard chart, 25 more people here so we can meet this $250 million goal, right? So I'm just like, blinders on, charging head forward, and saying like, I don't want to hear all this. Let's just go. We can do this.
And there's a tremendous, for those, I think for our listeners who haven't been, even if it's not fundraising, just goals within an organization, but let's take fundraising. That pressure weighs on you every single day, especially when you have an incredible pressure. We got to make more progress. That's human, right?
Yeah.
When your goal is that lofty.
Well, and you get focused on the number rather than the how and why.
Yeah.
Right?
Great point.
And so I'm just like, we got to do this. This is the way we're doing this, right? So anyway, 2018, maybe, light bulbs start going on. I'm like, wow, got to like turn this thing around because the iceberg's right in front of us. And like, we got to fix this. And then, 2020 happens, COVID, right? And, again, you want to talk about leadership moments. Man, that was the toughest time, I think, to be a leader, right? For me, looking back on the past, 20, 30 years, there was no more difficult time to be a leader because no decision that you could make was going to please the majority of the people.
Yeah.
Right. So, but we're right in the middle of this $250 million campaign. COVID hits, right? And our business is, being in front of people.
You're in the healthcare industry, the hardest industry to be in during COVID, of course.
And
Zero
then
questions. Hand down.
fundraising, it's like we got to be talking to people. We're
Yeah.
we're not dialing for dollars.
Yeah.
We're building relationships, trusted relationships with people in our community, right? Business leaders, philanthropists.
People
moms and
don't
dads.
give money over the phone; they give it face to face
Yeah,
when
they
you're
want-
talking and meeting
for
with
sure.
people. Yeah.
So we're just like shut down. Anyway, I think, and so March 17th, 2020, I made the decision that we were shutting down our office. We had one person who showed signs of COVID, never confirmed, but I'm like, and people start freaking out, right? And they're like, I mean, just so emotional.
Yeah.
Everybody's so afraid of what this thing is or what it isn't, what we don't know, what we do know. And so I just made the decision, we're going remote. We had no preparation to go remote. I mean, people didn't have laptops. Fortunately, we had metrics and we could, measure kind of how we were working. But we had 80 people who, like, literally overnight, I said, the office is shut down, and go. So we stayed remote for a year, right? And March 18th, 2000, I made the decision to bring everybody back. So making the decision to shut down the office was brutal.
Yeah.
And then maybe even more brutal was the decision to say, we're coming back and we're coming back full time.
Yeah.
And we're not doing like a hybrid or whatever.
March 18th of 2021, I give you a lot of credit because that was a very gutsy move from public opinion's perspective.
Sure.
Hindsight, looking back 2020, we should have done it, obviously a lot. So I feel your pain. I could only imagine.
Brutal.
Yeah.
Well, and I think, and so in that 1 year that we were remote, we hired 13 people, right? But we never met them face to face, right? And so everything was on Zoom or, on Zoom. Everything was on Zoom. And so we hired 13 people. And when I made the decision that we were the first team within Phoenix Children's Hospital to go remote. And we were the first department within Phoenix Children's Hospital to bring everybody back to work, right? And this is, again, like back to an earlier point, leadership is a lonely space, man. And, you don't have like a whole group of people to say like, hey, man, what are you doing? What do you think? Right. And so, and you're not like taking a poll, you're just like, you got to make the decision. You got to make the tough decisions. That's what leaders are paid for, is to make the tough decisions. Right. So anyway, make the tough decision, bring everybody back. Well, within 3 months of coming back, right? 11 of those 13 people that we hired during COVID, so all the people that we hired over Zoom, quit. So we had like 90% turnover in those 13 positions, right? And then by year end, so 9 months after we brought everybody back, the end of 2021, we had 27% turnover overall in our team. And I think, I wish I was smarter in many respects, or I was a quicker learner in many respects, but that was like the 2x4 to the forehead and say, something's got to change here, right? Yeah. And COVID, I say there were so many silver linings in that dark cloud, but this was a silver lining, I think, because it gave me that opportunity to take a step back and reassess where we're going. And now I look back and say the toughest decision I made as a leader, but the best decision I made as a leader, was to bring that team back, because everybody had so many options about where they could go work. But by making this decision, getting through the 27% turnover, we now had a team of people who loved the mission so much and they saw the benefit and value of being in office together.
You got the right people on the bus for the mission you were trying to
And I'm not saying that's the right thing for every business or for every business leader, for every team. I'm saying for me as the leader and for our mission, and the way we need to move as a team and the way we need to collaborate as a team, it was the very best decision. to make.
That's an incredible story, and every organization needs to get the right people on the bus. But how you just used a real world example of what that meant for your organization
Transformative.
is transformative, powerful, and
Yeah.
we can all learn from that.
Yeah.
So, Steve, you have so much great advice on leadership, and I want to kind of sum up the conversation on culture and leadership with this last question. When you made that decision, number one, did you know it was the right decision? And number two, what advice would you give to people who are in a leadership position and they have to make those tough decisions? Oftentimes, you don't know if it's the right decision, and I'm curious whether at that time you were just said, I'm taking a big gamble, or this is what I think is the right thing. And then lastly, from a culture perspective, which I believe, as we've talked about, is the basis or the foundation of any good leader. You cannot be a good leader if you haven't put culture at the top of your list of priorities.
Mm-hmm.
Based on your experience, what are the 2 or 3 things that you would tell us that are absolutely imperative within an organization if you are going to have a successful culture? So start with, did you know that was the right decision? How did you ultimately decide, I just have to do this?
Yeah.
And then what advice would you give to leaders when they have to make those tough decisions, when they don't know if it's the right decision? And then lastly, what are the 2 to 3 things that culturally you have to include to be successful?
Yeah, that's good. So, no, I had no idea that this was the right decision, because to me, again, as a leader, the most challenging aspect of that time period was my team, 90 some people looking at me constantly, expecting me to have the playbook. And there's no playbook that says leading your team through a pandemic, right?
Yeah,
Every day you're creating that playbook,
Yeah.
right? And so there was no roadmap. There was no manual telling me how to do this, telling any of us how to do this, right? And we're just trying to do the very best we could, and recognizing that there are 100 people who have all very, very different feelings, very different needs. It was really stressful on parents with young kids. Just like every part of it.
It was incredibly polarizing.
Very polarizing.
Which is the hardest time to lead teams.
Totally. And we had both poles and everybody in between. So any decision you made, 2/3 of the people were generally going to be unhappy, right? Because you either played to this pole, or the middle, but you had nice equal distribution across the continuum. So, no, I had no idea it was the right thing to do just from a leadership perspective, but I did feel very convicted that from a mission perspective, and for us to function as a high-functioning, high-performing team, we are better and stronger together. And I just kept messaging that to the team. I would send out communications. I've been writing monthly kind of posts for the team, and everything always is kind of starts and ends with, we're better and stronger together. And that I did believe at my core, and I felt convicted about that. So coming back, doing all that, it was just a huge opportunity to reset and now really understand, like, what is this culture need? Right. And what do I need to do as a leader to really support the culture moving from where we were kind of back in 2021 to where we are now 2.5 years later. And so much of it had to do with, kind of to your point, prioritizing culture. So, a year ago, I sent an email out. Again, this was just a total leadership disaster, right? A year ago, I sent an email out in December to the entire team and say, as we go into 2023, I'm going to be spending 80% of my time in these 3 buckets, right? And everything else, 20% of my time is for the urgent and important,
Mm-hmm.
because as a leader, we must address
yes,
those
we do.
daily and keep a little capacity for that.
As much as we may not want to.
Right, but
We have
to, yeah. So but the other 80% is in three big buckets. So one is anything related to strategy. I need to be leading or at the table. Two, I'm a great connector, and I'm a great fundraiser. And I say that humbly, but I say it truthfully. And so I need to be out in the community, and I need to be visible. I need to be the face of the brand. I need to be building those relationships and bringing them to the hospital and the foundation. And three, culture. So I send this email out a year ago and say, this is what I'm going to be spending this year doing. And really prioritize culture as something that, to your point, kind of when we began the conversation, culture really does start at the top. And by no means is it perfect. But over the course of the past year, by me really prioritizing it, not only for myself, but for the organization and the team, we've seen huge outputs of that, right?
And by prioritizing that operationally or functionally, what did that mean on a day-to-day basis? What specific things have you focused on over the last 12 months that have allowed you to see this exponential gain in output?
Yeah. And again, goes back to an earlier point. I mean, boy, it's so hard and yet so simple. It's recognizing that I don't have all the answers.
Yeah.
And it's like, be quiet and just listen and let other people kind of do their thing, right? So it was great because so we started a culture committee within the foundation 2.5 years ago, and it's evolved, I mean, so much. But like 6 months ago, the leaders of the culture committee, and I sit on the culture committee, right? And I'm the only formal leader on the committee.
Okay. The rest are the rest of the organization at the foundation.
Yeah, so it's I think a group of like 10 of us.
Okay.
This is the team of people who are, kind of doing the work every day.
Yeah.
And so we sit once a month and talk strategy, talk implementation, So anyway, 6 months ago, they were like, we're going to do a town hall, right? And I'm like, this is great because our culture committee, we started out with like 10 people, but then we decided to open it up to the team. And so one day in the committee meeting, we ended up like with 40 people in there. I'm like, this is unwieldy. We got to like think about this, right? So let's just have this and then we'll do these town halls like quarterly or whatever. So anyway, so they the culture committee plans this town hall, and they did, I don't know what it was, like Jeopardy, right?
Okay.
So the first half of it was a bunch of presentations about the different things the culture committee is working on, what our different business leaders are working on, kind of a speed dating kind of format. You got 2 minutes, go, and then next.
All focused on culture.
All focused on culture and pieces of our business, right? And then, so that was the first half hour. And the second half hour was playing Jeopardy, like Foundation Jeopardy or something like that. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this is going to be a disaster. This is like, nobody's going to want to do this, right? Well, so wrong I was, because this thing was roaring success. Yeah, but like on steroids, man. I think it was off the top. People had so much fun, and they're like having to take turns, get up in front of like 100 people and answer questions, and they're like talking to like somebody who's sitting next to them who's not their day-to-day teammate, but who like, and people are laughing and having fun. And I walk out of there and go, boy, I know so little about people, because I'd be like, absolutely not. That's going to be horrible, right? And I'm like, no, just shut up and let. And
I've learned that.
So great,
yeah,
so great.
When you give the opportunity, and the people and this is a criticism, expect the least amount of knowledge gained from, are almost undoubtedly the people I learn the most from.
Yeah.
Every single day I'm learning that.
Yeah, that's great.
And I think that's for me, it's been you really got to stop judging a book by its cover.
Mm-hmm.
And to your point, when you give people the opportunity to be heard in an unassuming, non-consequential, and fun environment,
Mm-hmm.
they have every human has so much to offer
Mm-hmm.
that you never in a million years would have guessed that Johnny or Melissa were thinking that strategically
Mm-hmm.
about their job and the mission of the organization overall.
Oh yeah.
But they have been, you just never gave them the opportunity to be heard.
Yeah, we have two of our team members, Natasha and Desiree. They're the chairs of this, and they have just done the most remarkable job, and they're just relentless in terms of the way they just keep driving cultural change and transformation. And it's happening, very organically and very grassroots like, with senior leadership support, but not driving it.
Yeah. And I think that's also very wise to recognize that you have to be open, you have to be involved, but let others drive the bus in that scenario, because they're the people that are really making the organization, taking it from point A to point B.
And they know way more about what their colleagues think and feel than I do.
Yeah.
Right. And when that light bulb goes on and you recognize you don't have the answers, you actually don't need to have all the answers, but build a culture where it becomes a lot more intuitive and where people there really feel a huge stake of ownership, and not me.
Yeah. A million more questions I want to ask on these topics, leadership culture, but I want to move on to something that you have a lot of experience in. Great conversation on that side, and a lot that I've certainly taken away, and I appreciate you being so open and sharing that.
Of course.
We talked at the top of the podcast that 2 years ago you made a commitment to the foundation and to the hospital, that before you retire, you would raise $500 million, $500 million.
Yeah.
Fundraising takes an incredible amount of talent, perseverance, and continual momentum. I don't need to tell this to you. And regardless of whether you're doing it from a philanthropic purpose, which I think can often be a lot more fulfilling than if you're in a for-profit organization trying to raise capital, for example, private equity or hedge fund or what have you. There are a lot of entrepreneurs that have great ideas, and they need help. They need an infusion of capital. And so they have to go into the marketplace and they have to sell their idea and sell themselves. And so I want to focus on this because you've been wildly successful. And I'm a big believer that regardless of what you're raising capital for, a lot of the principles of what drives that success are similar. So whether it's for profit, whether it's not for profit, again, I think the philanthropic side and a mission as noteworthy as Phoenix Children's Hospital certainly gives you a leg up or makes it a lot more meaningful. I think the principles of what makes you successful are what a lot of our listeners can think about when they're thinking about raising money, whether it's in a for-profit organization, not-for-profit, what have you. What would you say to those people in terms of being successful and what they need to do? Because looking someone in the eye and asking them for money, it doesn't, whether it's a political campaign, it doesn't matter what it's for. That's a big deal. And if you want to be successful in getting them to write the check, there's a lot involved in that. What makes you so successful at it? And what advice would you give to other people that are trying to accomplish the same thing for whatever reason?
Yeah. Well, I mean, first of all, so my commitment is to lead a team that will raise $500 million over the next several years, right? Because, if I make the mistake of thinking, I got this, I don't have it.
I like that distinction.
Right?
It shows how much you've learned. Exactly.
Yeah, so I just want to make sure that I'm clear about that. And so, back to, kind of my 3 priorities, it's leading strategy, right? It's starting with a vision and leading the strategy part of this, and recognize that if I'm not leading the strategy, I'm at the table where the strategy is being formulated, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so, we are a sales team in many respects,
Mm-hmm.
undifferent than any other organization. We're just not selling a tangible. We're selling mission and impact and connectedness and remembering kind of why we do what we do, right?
Yeah.
So those, I think, are kind of important pieces. 2 or 3 is, being clear on what problem are we trying to solve, right? And philanthropy is the solution to a problem, and a big idea can really attract big philanthropy. And we have to be well versed in understanding what problem we're trying to solve,
That's a
right? And
great
being
point.
super clear about that,
Yeah.
right? Just asking you for $5 because it's for the children's hospital, we can do that all day long and probably get 5 here, 5 there, 5 there, right? But now we're talking about $500 million, right? And something that is going to transform people's lives, right? And making sure that we stay focused on the why rather than the number.
Yeah. That's a great point. And so when you are talking with donors, and I
Yeah.
want to talk about, a lot of billionaires, a lot of millionaires, I have a few questions on that. What do you find connects the most and allows you to raise the capital you need to raise?
It's the relationships. And we've hired, we work with a number of outside people, and so we've been working with a gentleman out of Nebraska who's been given a list of our donors to talk to, and just to get feedback on how do they feel about us raising $500 million a year? I mean, in 5 years, 7 years. And do they think, what's their confidence level that we can become $100 million a year fundraising operation, right? What do they think of the leadership? What do they feel? Asking all the open up the kimono type questions.
Getting
right?
feedback from your customers.
Yeah.
It's so easy to do, and yet so many of us forget to do it.
Yeah.
That's
we're doing it, and it's been, again, I sat through one yesterday, and they were reviewing a couple of interviews that they'd done. And again, I'm saying this humbly, but just to illustrate your point, the consultant says, Steve, this is all about you and the relationship that you built with this person and this one and this one, right? And it keeps coming back to, they trust you, they see you as credible, they know your passion for the organization, you're able to communicate that to them, and you are the only person that they want to work with. Now, I'm not saying, I'm just
I
saying,
get it.
take me out of it, but the message is what's, I think, important,
Exactly.
is to say that, being authentic in relationships and really building those trusted, connections with people is one of the most valuable pieces for me in terms of running our business.
I want to take a step back, because I think this is such an important point that you've made. I say this humbly. And what is important, though, is that you recognize, a lot of people are afraid to say, I'm really good at this, or this is, if you're going to be successful and your organization is going to be successful, you need to put people in the positions where their strengths most align, and then they can take ownership of it. And so I love how you caveat, because you don't want to come across as over boastful or arrogant, and you say, it's about you. But you also take ownership, because the reality is you recognize that you couldn't do this without the incredible team that you have.
Exactly.
But you take ownership that, yes, my strengths best align with the organization. And I recognize I couldn't do any of this without all of my fellow colleagues in the team. But I'm going to take ownership for the role that I'm good at. And this is how I'm helping the organization be successful. My skill sets have allowed me to help the organization in this way. And so when you build that trust with those donors, the best leaders take responsibility for that ownership and can say, yep, that's a part of what I do well. And now I have this whole other team where I'm not so good at, or that's not where my strengths are. And they're helping me be successful in what I'm doing.
Exactly.
The reason I think that's so important, I meet a lot of entrepreneurs and a lot of business owners who are tepid or timid about their strengths and weaknesses, or they don't want to say, well, I did this. And it's okay to say, you know what? Me and my team did this. I'm really good at this. And that's the people, our customers recognize that. And I'll take credit for that. But I'm going to also give credit due where everybody else is, because I can't be successful here if all of my other colleagues and my team aren't being just as successful in where their strengths align. And so I appreciate you taking ownership of that, because this idea of being timid about being confident in your strengths, no, you want everybody on your team to be that. Now, you have the leader who says, I did this, and they never give credit where credit is due, and they fail every day of the week and twice on Sunday. So I just wanted to make that distinction, because I see a lot of business owners and entrepreneurs often starting out that are a little bit tepid about taking responsibility for their strengths. No, that's fine. Just be sure you give credit where credit is due as well.
Yeah. And that, back to that, sending out that email a year ago, here's the 3 things I know I'm good at, right? Probably 80% of the other stuff I'm not great at. And there's people who are much better on the team than I am. And so I just have released myself from all the things I'm probably not very good at, focus my energy and my time on areas that I'm going to be the most impactful for the organization, right? And then let everybody else do what they're great at. And that's, I think, the winning part of our culture.
And I think we've just kind of encapsulated the real distinction between leaders who are successful and leaders who aren't. They know what they're good at. They take acknowledgement from it. But more importantly, they acknowledge what they stink at. And they let other people take care of it, and they give them credit for that. And don't too many leaders try to meddle in everything and do, kind of the caricature that you had talked about earlier in your career. Just the opposite. A leader is knowing when to be involved and when to lead, and when not to be involved and trust other people. That was a little sidebar, but I thought that was so important.
Good, though. It's good.
So going back to the meeting you had yesterday, and you're getting feedback from customers. So that relationship you built. And I don't, I think in this day and age, people are, I don't want to say losing the importance of relationships, but technology sure makes it a lot harder. And when I look at the younger generations, they're all of their life and relationships are built across this phone. And they're going to realize as they move into their professional career, you can never replace this. And the handshake and the human interaction. And
that's why we brought our team back.
And that's exactly the point. That's exactly right. And so I want people to recognize, you just talked about the only way you and your team are going to be successful in this incredible goal of $500 million is you operating in your strength set, relationships, and building on that. And that's why people are giving you money. Now, you have an incredible cause, and you have to have an awesome value proposition. But you can have the best value proposition in the world if you don't have that relationship, and there isn't that element of trust and integrity, something that you just talked about. That's why you've been so successful. The value proposition and all that doesn't even matter. You've dealt with a lot of millionaires and billionaires. That's interesting in the sense that what most surprises you about what people's general caricatures, I will use, of people who have been incredibly successful and now are giving philanthropically. I ask this because our society, especially in this day and age, there used to be an aspiration of, I want to learn from what they did and do that too, for all sorts of different reasons. And I see this shift, and perhaps I'm wrong, so if you guys disagree, let me know, where they're kind of frowned upon, or people have a degree of animosity that they become successful and that they have as much as they have. Now, set that aside. Some people create wealth on the backs of other people in a very poor way. We're not talking about what I would argue is a small class of that. Give us some insight into your experiences with these donors and who they are as people, regardless of what their net worth is.
I have a basic belief about people, and that is that we all want to know that we've made a difference, right? And whether you have 2 nickels or 20 billion, I think that inherent drive to know that you've made a difference is the tie that binds us together, right? And so there's something to be learned from every person that we interact with. Everybody's got a story, and it's like you have to take the time to get to know their story, right? And the money, the car, the house, the jet, whatever, you strip it all away, right? Because it still comes down to, I need to know your story,
Yeah.
right? And if I care enough about humanity and I care enough about doing what I do, the way I get fueled up is to learn people's story.
Yeah.
And I believe we have a lot more in common than we do differences. And that's the way I really try to operate with people.
And I think
I talk to everybody, and
I've seen that. I love
get
it.
laughed at.
Yeah.
Like, dude, just keep walking and just be quiet. Now I can't, because I notice everybody, and I mean, and people want to be noticed,
Yes,
right?
they do.
And I do that just because I love doing that.
Yeah.
It fills me up.
And to your point, it doesn't matter whether you have 2 nickels or 20 billion. We're all humans. We all get dressed the same way every morning. And we all have a story, and there's value and input.
Yeah.
Everybody has a life experience that they can share, and we can all learn from, no matter what your balance sheet says or doesn't say, or what possessions you have. When you talk about, this is a broader question, Phoenix Children's Foundation and the hospital, we could talk about this for a million years. The healthcare system in this country is probably one that's talked about the most at the political levels, or one of those really key issues. Healthcare has been a huge issue, not only because there are disagreements about how do you fund healthcare and should you have a nationalized healthcare system and what have you, but I think more broadly speaking, the cost of healthcare has gotten so incredibly expensive. What would you say to someone who says, why does Phoenix Children's Hospital, which is a not-for-profit, but they charge customers and patients lots of money. I say lots in quotes because that's just the general feeling about all healthcare systems.
Yeah.
Why do they need a foundation, and why should someone give them money when they're charging people all this money and it's still really expensive? What would you say to someone that would say
I mean,
that?
it's a great question. And I mean, we get asked that a lot. And so, our CEO, Bob Meyer, I mean, has just done such an incredible job leading this organization since 2004. I've heard him say this, and I steal it from him because it's just so right. He goes, there's 3 sources of money for Phoenix Children's Hospital. 1 is income from operations, 2 is debt, and 3 is philanthropy. That's it. There's only 3 inputs into this money model, right? And the resources required to run Phoenix Children's Hospital, to make sure that we have the most state-of-the-art equipment and technology, that we have the best of the best in terms of talent in Phoenix Children's Hospital. The way this market has grown, we're in the 4th largest pediatric market in the country. And we have long waiting lists for kids to get in to see specialists. We have to continue to add more resources. It's economics 101, supply demand, right?
Yeah.
And there is so much demand for the kind of service that Phoenix Children's Hospital provides. I mean, just look at this mental health thing. I mean, this is a whole other topic for a whole other podcast,
we could
right?
go on that one for
Yeah. But I mean, and so we just need to keep growing our footprint so that we can fulfill our promise to bring the very best healthcare to the kids of Arizona, right? And so, there's only so much debt we can take on, right? There's only so much income from operations that can happen. And philanthropy is the third leg of that three-legged stool. And the pie is only so big. And the demand or the consumption of that pie is much greater than the size of that pie.
Sure.
So we have to keep inputting as much as we can to continue to grow and meet the needs of this market.
What is how do for-profit hospitals survive then?
Well, they have shareholders and they have stock, they have a constant infusion of capital.
So they raise capital.
And they're raising capital through equity. We're not. We can't do that. So philanthropy is our capital raise, if you will.
Yeah. And would you say that the average rates that they charge inherently, because of that for-profit nature, are higher than what you guys charge? I know that's a really broad question that's hard to answer, but these are the questions people think, okay, why do you have to be so reliant on fundraising? Is it because you are charging a lot less than what if you were to go to a for-profit organization to get this great care for kids you otherwise would pay?
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that, honestly. What I do know is that children's hospitals, if you go back to their very kind of root, are all kind of in this nonprofit tax exempt category, right? And there's this enormous commitment to charity care. And we don't call it charity care in our world. We talk about access to all children, right? Yeah. But that's part of our mission, is to, treat first, ask about payment second.
Yeah.
Right. And maybe in a for-profit model, that's a little bit different. But nonetheless, there are great, probably for-profit healthcare providers out there as well. The economics of the healthcare system is like so complex, and there's no unilateral kind of concurrence on like, here's the problem and here's the solution. Right?
Well, yeah, nothing this large is really that simple. You can never typically break down a problem. Most problems of this magnitude,
so complex.
There's a lot of moving pieces.
Yeah.
Steve, you've been very gracious with your time. So I want to kind of focus on that, because people in this country, and we've seen healthcare costs balloon and blossom, and you're trying to do with your team and your organization what you can to make sure everybody has access to, especially, I don't want to say the weakest, but the most vulnerable in our society, kids, get the best and greatest care that they can. If you were in charge of the world,
I'm not.
You're not. But if you were in charge of the world, people want to know, what do we need to be thinking about long term to make meaningful differences to our healthcare system, so that in 30, 40, 50 years, we're not having these same conversations about trying to ensure that everybody has access to healthcare, et cetera, et cetera. Costs are through the roof. Costs for hospitals, COVID, are through the roof. Hospitals have seen margin shrink, and people think hospitals are making tons of money. I've seen the balance sheets of lots of hospitals, and they're, yes, some do charge a lot and they make a lot of money, but you could get into Medicare and what actually ends up coming back to the hospital insurance. It's a whole complex issue. But if you had to boil it down, where do you see the biggest opportunity for us to start making meaningful change, so that in the long run, because this problem will not get fixed in the short run, in the long run, we can start to make real progress on bringing the cost of healthcare down, making it more affordable, and not continue to have the issues that we see today in 2023?
Wow.
It's a really broad question. It may be a little bit unfair, but I ask because I think you have a unique perspective into all the operations, having been on the business side and on the philanthropy side. And so that's why I ask, because I think you can give us a lot of insight, at least food for thought.
Yeah.
What I've seen or what I've experienced is this is a real core problem. And, I'll put in my 2 cents. Where I think there's been a disconnect, and a lot of people might disagree with this or get angry, but I believe this to be the case. There are rewards and consequences, right? If I go out and I drink 24 cans of Pepsi every day, there are going to be health consequences
Sure.
that I have. And anytime you mess up that risk reward system, and I can live however I want and do whatever I want from a health perspective,
Mhm.
but I eliminate the consequences, meaning I can get healthcare wherever I want for free. You're going to have, it's just human nature, you're going to have an unbalance in the equilibrium.
Mhm.
Does that make sense what I'm saying?
Mhm.
And so I'm a big believer that we somehow have to realign the incentive to take your own personal health seriously. And I'm not saying people don't, but I think you get the gist of my question with there's real costs when you don't do that. And you can't just pass those on. You have to take responsibility for your health more than anybody else because no one else cares as much about your health as you do.
Yeah. I mean, I'm glad you said that because that was where my brain went initially, and then I'm like, "You're oversimplifying this." So, but then it's kind of back to kind of an earlier conversation that we had, which was kind of my entree into philanthropy. So back in the '90s, there was a movement driven by the insurance companies called capitation, right? And
Capitation.
so it was a payment model that said for every member of this health plan, we're going to pay different parts of the healthcare system per member per month fee, right? And we're not going to pay different rates for everything, right? So if you had a group of 100,000 employees, and I'm probably butchering this up somewhat, but the concept is right, to say that you're getting $2 for every person, right? But if that group in a monthly basis consumes more than the $200,000 that you've just been given in the premium, you're upside down as a hospital, right? So what it did was drive kind of the incentives in such a way to keep people out of the hospital, right? And so, well, you can do everything to deny care, right? But the real solution is preventing people. So that's really what excited me back in the '90s is like, hey, let's get into the prevention and wellness business.
Yeah,
right?
I mean, the ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure.
Exactly. And that would, kind of make economic sense as well as being focused on doing the right thing for people as well. So here we are, 25 years later, right? We're still having the same conversation, but at a much more significant magnitude. And, I mean,
and we still have capitation. And so that inherently is the problem. I mean, how you just described it, I love how simple you just described it. How do you think we fix that? Let me ask you this, and I'm going to ask you to be, I recognize in your role, you have to be cautious.
The most political person.
Yeah, exactly. Do you think insurance companies want to maintain that system? It seems like that wouldn't be beneficial for them either. Like, how do we change the system, I guess, is the question that I'm asking. And who's preventing that from changing?
I mean, I think in the business world, right? Financial reward drives a lot of behavior. And this is not me speaking about the insurance companies, it's just speaking broadly, right? And you look at where all the incentives are, it all comes down to money.
So we have that equilibrium mismatch.
It's unbalanced.
And if you could do one thing to help balance that equation, and again, it's not going to change overnight. What do you think we should be focusing on in the next 3 to 5 years to bring a little bit more equilibrium? Is there one or two things that you can point to in your experience that maybe you guys see at the hospital that says, you know what, if we would focus on these things, it would go a long way to helping us start the process of getting to equilibrium there? Or does it have to start at the federal level? Does it have to be a legislative thing? And I'm a big believer that the more government gets involved, the more things get messed up. And the healthcare industry, I think, is a perfect example of that. But where do you think it needs to start?
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing is that it's such a complicated agenda, and there are so many pieces that are so big and so powerful that create this disequilibrium that you kind of referenced. And
the focus on financial rewards is just too great that until we find a way, which I recognize, I don't want to say is impossible, but I'm a realist, maybe impossible because
certain challenge.
Yeah. Until we get that, we break into that, we're not going to see meaningful change.
Right.
That makes sense. Steve, you've been so gracious with your time. We've covered a lot. I love our conversation on leadership and culture. I think this is one that every entrepreneur, business owner, human needs to listen to, because everything that we've talked about is, of course, relatable in an organization, but the same thing in family, in personal life, in friendship. So many of the concepts that we talk about transcend all different aspects of life. Is there anything that we haven't talked about that you think would be particularly important or beneficial to me and the listeners that stands out to you? And it can be personal, professional, anything.
I just say that, first of all, thank you for having me, and I've loved it. It's been great, and you're really, really great at what you do.
Well, thank you.
I appreciate it enormously. It's like maybe we talked about on the phone before we came here. I think I just want to say, like, life is so complicated, and there are so many moving parts, and there's so much kind of coming back at us all the time. And just to like really take time and, begin to explore what your purpose is, and how you can make a difference. I just feel so blessed that my whole adult life, I've worked for an organization that changes kids' lives and families' lives. And I couldn't be prouder. And, I know we all have an opportunity to say that, not necessarily work for that organization, but give to that organization, serve that mission, serve that purpose, right? And boy, let's clean up the mess that's out there, because there's a lot of messiness going on out there, but there's a lot of beauty, and there's a lot of grace, and there's a lot of goodness. And let's harness all the goodness and the grace and the beauty and make tomorrow a little bit better for everybody.
Yeah, and it starts one person by one person. Totally. A lot of people think there's nothing I can do, and the reality is that's not true.
Not true.
You get a whole shouting crowd with one person. You've seen it at football games. One person starts it, and then everybody does it, and becomes a thunderous roar.
Yep.
Steve, thank you so much for your time.
Really thank you. Loved it.
Wow. I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Steve. That was probably one of the most enjoyable and really intricate conversations I've had as it relates to leadership and culture. So much to unpack there. If you liked what we talked about, or you have some insights or thoughts on what we talked about, things to share, please reach out to me on Twitter, Holland Podcast. Love to hear your thoughts. As always, we grow, and this only gets as big as we collectively make it. Please subscribe to the YouTube channel, the Andrew Holland Podcast. Like this episode, share it with your friends and family and colleagues so they can learn from Steve's advice as well. And on your favorite audio platforms, whether it's Apple Podcasts or Spotify, please follow the Andrew Holland Podcast. Like this episode. That's how we grow. Thank you so much for joining us again this week. Have a great rest of your week, and we'll talk again next Wednesday. Thank you for listening to the Andrew Holland Podcast. Be sure to visit our website, theandrewhollandpodcast.com, for additional content on business, entrepreneurship, and everything in between. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, The Andrew Holland Podcast, to get notifications when new podcasts have been released. And lastly, follow us on Twitter, Holland Podcast. That's Holland Podcast, for all the conversations we're having outside the podcast. Thanks again so much for joining us this week. Have a great day, and we'll talk again next week.